The man who cleaned the hospital floors at night had hands that didn't match the rest of him. That's what Catherine Asante-Mensah noticed first. Not his face, not his uniform, not the way he moved the mop in slow, deliberate arcs down the corridor of the fourth floor. It was his hands. The knuckles were scarred in a particular way, the kind of scarring that came from years of fine, precise work. The kind of hands that belonged behind a surgeon's gloves, not wrapped around a mop handle. Catherine had been Chief Operating Officer of Ridgeline Health Network for 11 years. She had a gift, or maybe a curse, for noticing things that didn't fit. She stood at the nurse's station at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, reviewing the quarterly budget projections her director had flagged as urgent, and she watched the man work. He didn't look up. He didn't acknowledge her presence the way the other night staff did. The small nod, the half smile, the instinctive deference that people offered when they recognized someone with authority. He simply worked, focused, quiet, as though she wasn't there at all. She looked at the name tag clipped to his chest. Kwame, Environmental Services. She went back to her spreadsheets, but she kept thinking about those hands. It had started 3 weeks earlier, on a night when Catherine was working late, which was most nights if she was being honest, and the hospital's internal records system had gone down. Not a full crash. Something stranger. A partial failure in the archival database, the kind of subtle malfunction that the IT department hadn't been able to diagnose for 2 days straight. The consultants they'd brought in from MedCore Solutions had billed the hospital $40,000 and produced a report that said, in 12 pages of technical language, essentially nothing useful. On the third night of the outage, Catherine had been crossing the fourth floor when she heard a keyboard, a rapid, assured clicking coming from the small auxiliary workstation near the linen storage room. Workstations that weren't supposed to be accessed without IT clearance. She pushed open the door. Kwame was sitting at the terminal, still in his uniform, his cleaning cart parked in the hallway. His fingers moved across the keyboard with a precision and fluency that had absolutely no business belonging to a man whose job description involved disinfecting floors. The screen filled with lines of code that Catherine, despite not being a technical person, could recognize as complex and purposeful. He heard her and stopped immediately, turned around. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "The log corruption is in the archival bridge," he said finally. His voice was calm, not defensive, not frightened, just calm, the way you were calm when you told someone something factually true. "Your IT team keeps patching the front end. The problem is 3 layers down. It'll keep recurring." Catherine looked at him. "Who are you?" "I clean floors," he said. And then he stood up, took his cart from the hallway, and walked away. She stood in that small room for a full minute after he left. His name, according to HR, was Kwame Asante-Boateng. He was 43 years old. He had been employed by Ridgeline Health Network in Environmental Services for 2 years and 4 months. His emergency contact was listed as his daughter, Abena, no last name given, just Abena, daughter, 16. There was no next of kin beyond that. His performance reviews were good, reliable, thorough, keeps to himself. That was the entirety of what HR had to say. There was nothing in his file about what he'd done before. Catherine went to her IT director the next morning and told her to follow the fix that had been suggested. She didn't explain how she knew. The director looked at her strangely but did it. The archival bridge was the problem. It took them 2 hours to confirm it and another 4 to fix it. The system came back online fully functional for the first time in nearly a week. The consultants from MedCore had packed up and gone home. They had never identified the source. Catherine told herself to let it go. People were complicated. People had histories. It wasn't her job to excavate them. She let it go for almost 4 days. Then she stood following him. Not right away, and not recklessly. Catherine Asante-Mensah had not gotten where she was by being reckless. She was methodical. She was careful. She told herself it was simply due diligence, the kind of informal assessment she might make about any employee whose behavior had raised a flag. But she knew, if she was being honest with herself, that there was something else, something she couldn't quite name. A feeling that there was a story here that mattered, that she was on the edge of understanding something important, and she didn't want to look away. She started parking in the lower lot on the nights she knew he worked and leaving through the side exit at the end of her shift. She told herself she was just being observant. She felt, each time she did it, faintly absurd. A woman who oversaw a $300 million health network, following a janitor through the streets of Ottawa like some kind of underpaid detective. But she kept doing it. He took the 95 bus. Every night, no matter the weather, he got off at Baseline Station and walked 12 minutes, she counted, from a distance, to a low brick building on a quiet street in Carlington that had a painted sign above the door, Carlington Community Health Hub. The first night, she waited outside. The lights were on. She could hear voices. She went home. The second night, she walked past the window. There were children inside, teenagers, mostly, 8 or 9 of them, sitting around a cluster of tables, and Kwame Asante-Boateng standing at the front with a whiteboard marker in his hand, drawing what looked like. Catherine pressed her face toward the glass, anatomical diagrams. A heart, labeled chambers, arrows showing blood flow. His handwriting was clear and precise. A girl in the front row, maybe 15, was taking notes with a focus that Catherine hadn't seen in a boardroom in years. She stood there longer than she should have. She went inside on the third night. The session was winding down. Kids were packing backpacks, pulling on coats against the November cold. Kwame was at the whiteboard erasing his diagrams when he heard the door. He turned around and saw her. He didn't look surprised. He looked, if anything, the way a man looked when he'd been waiting for something and it had finally arrived. "Miss O.C. Mensah," he said, "you know who I am. I've worked in your hospital for 2 years. I know who everyone is." The last of the teenagers filed out. A girl, the one from the front row, paused in the doorway and looked at Catherine with frank, assessing eyes. Then she looked at Kwame. "You coming, Dad? In a few minutes, Abina. Wait outside, please." So the daughter had a last name after all. It was the same as his. Catherine sat down at one of the tables because she suddenly felt that standing was the wrong posture for this conversation. Kwame sat across from her. "What is this?" she asked, not unkindly. "It's a study group," he said. "These kids want to go into medicine, health sciences, nursing maybe, some of them. They live in this neighborhood. Their schools don't have the resources." He paused. "So I provide them. You teach them. I try." "Kwame." She said his name carefully. "What did you do before?" He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she thought he might not answer. "I was a physician," he said. "Internal medicine. St. Michael's Hospital, Toronto. Before that, training in London. Before that, medical school in Accra." He said it evenly, the way you said things that had long since stopped being able to hurt you in the acute way, that had settled into something duller and more permanent. "I lost my license 4 years ago." The full story took a long time, and Kwame Asante-Boateng was not a man who told it easily. But Catherine was patient, and the community hub was warm, and the night pressed against the windows. He had been one of the most respected hospitalists on staff at St. Michael's. 8 years, no formal complaints, 2 teaching awards from the University of Toronto residency program. He had a reputation for catching what others missed. The patient who looked fine on paper but wasn't. The symptom that didn't belong with the diagnosis. His colleagues sent him their difficult cases. His director of medicine had been a man named Dr. Franklin Breckenridge. Breckenridge was polished and politically well-connected, the kind of doctor who spent more time on hospital committees and conference panels than in actual patient care, and who had built his career on being seen as the authority in rooms where Kwame did most of the actual work. For years, this arrangement had been, if not comfortable, at least functional. It stopped being functional when Kwame filed a formal safety report. A patient had been mismanaged. The errors had been Breckenridge's. A misdiagnosis followed by an incorrect treatment protocol that had put a 61-year-old woman in the ICU. She had survived, barely. Kwame had written the incident report himself clearly with full documentation because he believed that was what you did. You wrote the report. You told the truth. You protected the next patient. What he had not understood, or perhaps had chosen not to understand, was how much Breckenridge was protected. By the hospital board, by the medical college committee, by 20 years of social capital and well-placed friendships, by the particular machinery that exists in institutions to protect people who look like they belong there and to doubt the ones who don't. The investigation that followed was not an investigation into Breckenridge's conduct. It was an investigation into Kwame's falsified medication charts, the college was told, prescription irregularities, a pattern of documentation errors spanning, allegedly, 18 months. Records that Kwame had no memory of producing because he hadn't produced them. Records that had appeared in the system sometime after he filed the safety report, inserted with enough technical skill that only someone with deep access to the hospital's records architecture would have known how. The irony, and Catherine would think about this later, was that Kwame understood exactly how it had been done, because he was also, quietly, the person on staff who understood hospital record systems better than anyone else. He had taught himself during a long convalescence after a car accident years earlier, when he had nothing to do but read and think. He had used that knowledge to try to prove the records were fabricated. The college had been uninterested. Breckenridge's lawyers had been very interested in discrediting him. The process had been long and expensive and had ended with the outcome that the powerful usually produced for the powerless. His license was suspended, then revoked. His wife had left 2 years before any of this. That was a separate story, and not one he told in any detail. His daughter was 12 when he lost his license. He had moved to Ottawa because he had a cousin there and because nobody knew him, and because he needed to start over somewhere that he could be invisible for a while. He cleaned hospital floors because he still wanted to be near medicine. He wasn't sure he could explain that more clearly than that. He cleaned floors, and he taught these kids on the nights he could, and he was raising his daughter, and he was waiting. Though he did not say this part, for something, though he no longer quite knew what. Catherine drove home at 1:30 in the morning. She sat in her driveway for a long time without going inside. She thought about a woman she had met once, early in her career, a senior administrator who had told her, "The institution will protect itself first." Always. Your job, if you want to keep it, is to know when to step in front of that and when to step aside. She had taken that as wisdom at the time. She was no longer sure it was. She thought about Breckenridge, because she knew the name, or rather she knew the type. Ridgeline had its own version, had always had its own version. She thought about the audits she'd approved without looking closely enough, the committees she'd staffed without asking hard enough questions, the things she had seen out of the corner of her eye and chosen not to turn toward. She went inside and sat at her kitchen table and did not sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, she called her legal team. She asked them to locate the original College of Physicians and Surgeons investigation file and any supplementary documentation. This took several days and was met with bureaucratic resistance that she pushed through methodically and without drama. Then she called her head of IT, not the director, but the individual who actually ran the systems, and she asked him a very specific question. Was it theoretically possible for records in a hospital's documentation system to be retroactively inserted in a way that would appear native to the original file structure? He said yes. It was possible. It was difficult. It would require elevated access and significant technical knowledge, but it was possible. She asked him to look at something for her. She sent him the documentation from Kwame's college file, the medication records that had been used as evidence. She told him what she was looking for. She told him this was not a formal request, not yet, and that she needed his honest assessment. He came back to her 3 days later. The records, he said, had metadata inconsistencies consistent with post-creation insertion. In plain language, the dates on the documents didn't match the system logs that would have been generated at the time of their supposed creation. Somebody had been careful, but not careful enough. Or perhaps they had simply not expected anyone to look. Catherine drove to the community hub on a Thursday evening and waited until the study session ended and the kids had gone, and Kwame was stacking chairs. "I need you to help me," she said. He set down the chairs. He looked at her the way a person looked when they had learned, through hard experience, not to let themselves want things. "Help you with what?" Ridgeline's internal data architecture is based on the same legacy system as St. Michael's. Same vendor, same base code, same structural vulnerabilities. I have an IT analyst who found anomalies in the records used in your college case, but he doesn't have the depth of knowledge to trace them fully. You do. That's a significant ask, he said. He wasn't dismissive. He was simply measuring. I know. You understand that even if we find what I believe we'll find, the reinstatement process is not simple. The college doesn't move quickly. There are no guarantees. I know that, too. He was quiet. From down the hallway came the sound of his daughter's voice. She was on the phone, laughing at something, the easy, bright laugh of a teenager who did not yet know the full weight of what her father had carried. He looked in the direction of the sound. "My daughter asked me last week why I still come here," he said, "to the hub. Why I keep doing this when it doesn't, when it can't give me back what I lost." He paused. "I told her that sometimes you do things not because they fix anything. You do them because they're true. Because the thing you're doing is the right shape for who you are." He looked back at Catherine. "What you're proposing," he said, "does it have anything to do with that? Or is this only about the hospital's interests?" It was the most honest question anyone had asked her in years. She sat with it. "Both," she said. "It started as one and became the other. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, something quieter than that. "That's a more honest answer than I expected," he said. "Then you'll help?" A long pause. Outside the window, a car passed. A dog barked somewhere on the street. "I'll need access to the archival bridge," he said. What followed was 6 weeks of quiet, careful work. Kwame came to the hospital on his days off, not as an employee but as a consultant. A role Catherine created and formalized with enough paperwork to give it structural legitimacy. Her legal team was involved. Her board chair, a woman named Dr. Yvette Marchand, was informed on a need-to-know basis and said only, "You'd better be right about this, Catherine." Catherine said she thought she was. Kwame worked the way Catherine had suspected he would. Methodically, without drama, reconstructing the chain of record modifications with the kind of patient precision that took someone who was both technically expert and deeply, personally motivated. He found what he'd believed he would find. The records used in his college case had been created and inserted into the hospital system over a 3-day period following his safety report, using administrator-level credentials that had since been deactivated. The credentials belonged to a network access account created for a consulting engagement. An engagement managed, the paperwork showed, through Breckenridge's administrative office. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was better than a smoking gun. It was a documented chain of access, modification, and motive, assembled from sources that predated anyone's awareness that anyone was looking. Catherine spent 2 weeks with her legal team preparing the formal submission to the College of Physicians and Surgeons. She had it reviewed by an independent expert. She had it reviewed again. Then she filed it, and she filed a separate complaint with the hospital corporation at St. Michael's, and she wrote a personal letter to the chair of the board there. A letter that was factual, specific, and did not use a single word more than the facts required. The college process was slow, as Kwame had warned her, but it moved. The day the preliminary review committee agreed to reopen the case formally, Catherine was in a budget meeting when the notification came through on her phone. She read it twice. She did not show any reaction in the meeting because the meeting was about something unrelated, and it was not the place. But she went to the hub that evening. Kwame was there alone, setting up for the next session. He had already heard. The college had notified him directly, as they were required to. He looked up when she came in. He had the look of a man who had been bracing for something for so long that when it finally arrived, the absence of bracing felt strange and unfamiliar, like taking off armor you'd forgotten you were wearing. "You did that," he said. "You built the case," she said. "I just had the standing to submit it." "That's not nothing." "No," she agreed, "it isn't." They stood there for a moment in the fluorescent light of the hub, among the folding chairs and the whiteboard and the stacked anatomy textbooks. "What happens now?" she asked. "I wait," he said. "I teach. I make sure Abina finishes her applications. She's applying to health sciences at Ottawa U and McMaster." He said this with a quiet, specific pride that Catherine recognized as something distinct from the ordinary parental kind, the pride of a person who had made sure that the thing that had been taken from them would not be taken from their child. "And if the reinstatement goes through?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know yet. I think about returning to practice. I think about what that would look like now after all this." He paused. "If we all think this work here matters in ways that a hospital shift doesn't always. These kids have no one telling them they belong in medicine. I can be that person. I was that person before any of this happened, and it turns out I still am." He said it simply, without sentiment. It was just true. 3 months later, Ridgeline Health Network announced a new initiative. A structured mentorship program in partnership with 3 Carlington community organizations, providing academic support and health sciences mentorship to students from underrepresented communities. The program was named, at Catherine's insistence and over the mild objection of her communications team, after nothing at all. It was called, simply, the Carlington Health Pathways Program, because Kwame had said that named programs were too often more about the namer than the named. The pilot cohort included 9 students. Abina was not among them, by her father's design. He said it would be a conflict, and also that his daughter did not need a program to find her way. Catherine suspected he was right on both counts. The day the program officially launched, Catherine was standing in the parking lot of the hub watching a van unload donated textbooks and laptop bags when her phone rang. It was the communications director calling about a quote for the press release. She looked at the van. She looked at the textbooks. She looked at Kwame through the hub's window, showing a student something on a page, the student leaning in with an expression of concentrated attention. She thought about all the time she had seen something out of the corner of her eye and chosen not to turn toward it. She told the communications director, "Say the program exists because we identified a gap in our community and we had a responsibility to address it. And say that we were fortunate enough to have people around us who helped us see what we'd been missing." She hung up and she went inside. The College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario issued its final determination 8 months after the case was reopened. The fabricated records were formally withdrawn from Kwame's file. The prior suspension and revocation were set aside. Dr. Kwame Asante-Boateng was restored to the Register of Physicians in good standing. He called Catherine from the parking lot of a Tim Hortons in Centertown because that was where he'd been when he got the call and he hadn't had anywhere particular to go after. He said, "It's done." She said, "I know. I got the notification." Neither of them said anything for a moment. "I'm not going back to the way things were before," he said. "I didn't think you would. I'm thinking about a clinic. Carlington, or somewhere nearby. Low barrier access. Some of the families whose kids come to the hub, they can't navigate the system the way the system expects them to. Someone should be there for that." "That sounds right," she said. "It does," he agreed. "It took me 4 years of cleaning floors to figure out what kind of doctor I actually wanted to be. I'm not sure I would have gotten there otherwise." There was something in his voice that wasn't quite irony and wasn't quite grief. It was the particular tone of a person who had been through something true and had come out knowing themselves more clearly than they had going in. "What about you?" he asked. Catherine stood at her office window, looking out at the parking lot 6 floors below. The autumn light was doing something gentle to the concrete. "I've been having some conversations," she said, "about where resources go, about whose programs get funded and whose don't, about what it looks like when an institution finally decides to look at itself clearly." She paused. "It's a long conversation. I'm only at the beginning of it. That's still further than where you were." "Yes," she said. "It is." They said goodbye. The phone call ended. The parking lot below her window filled slowly with afternoon shadows, and the city moved around the hospital the way cities always do. Indifferent to individual stories, indifferent to what it costs to tell the truth, indifferent to the quiet and ordinary courage it takes to simply look, clearly and without flinching, at what is right in front of you. Some people wait their whole lives to have their dignity given back. They should never have had to wait at all.